Welcome to the Economist in Your Ear podcast. Today we're looking into something pretty fascinating and, well, pretty complex out of North Korea. The Wonsan Kalma Beach Resort. This is this huge new project. It had a partial opening recently, June 24th, apparently with Kim Jong-un himself, relaxing poolside. And then just a few days later, July 1st, it officially opened its doors to North Koreans, and it is massive. We're talking 5 kilometers of beaches, 54 hotels, cinemas, shopping malls, restaurants, the works. Now, the initial take we're seeing, particularly from The Economist, is that this giant resort, it's mainly built for North Koreans themselves, not really for foreign tourists, who are often hard to attract anyway.
And that's exactly where we want to start our discussion with you today. The goal here isn't just to recap that view. We really want to dig into the assumptions behind it. Think about what might be missing from that picture, and maybe pull in some other context to get a, shall we say, more rounded understanding of this whole project. Because what's really interesting is how one event, like a resort opening, can mean so many different things depending on how you look at it.
Okay, so let's unpack this. The Economist kicks off with a pretty strong claim about who this resort is really for. They argue it's built chiefly for North Koreans, and they've got some points to back that up. I mean, first off, just the sheer scale, 54 hotels, 5 kilometers of beach. That alone sort of suggests an internal focus, doesn't it?
It does. The capacity seems enormous.
Right. And they point out, even if Chinese tourism bounced back to its pre-pandemic peak, that was about 350,000 visitors in 2019, bringing in maybe $175 million across the whole country, even if all those tourists went just to Wonsan Kalma, it still wouldn't fill the reported 20,000 beds there. Not even close.
So the numbers for foreign tourism just don't seem to justify that kind of investment on their own.
Exactly. And then there's the cost comparison. Foreign tour companies apparently offer much cheaper beach holidays elsewhere. You could go to Weihai in China for about a third of what some Russian packages to North Korea cost. It sort of suggests North Korea isn't really trying to compete head-on for that typical beach tourist market.
It's not positioned as a budget destination then.
Not at all. And, as The Economist notes, Western tourists often have different motivations anyway. They might be looking for that, quote, socialism-inflected time warp, visiting historical sites, maybe seeing the embalmed leaders, not just lounging on a beach. Simon Cockrell from Korea Tours put it quite well. He said, if all you look for in a holiday is hotels along a beach, there is Spain, and they have Wi-Fi.
Hey, that's a good point. The infrastructure, the connectivity, it's a different world.
Right. And finally, The Economist connects it to North Korea's existing system of rewards for model workers. Things like holiday camps, school trips, union holidays, domestic trips fit right into that existing framework.
Okay, so if you put all that together, the Economist angle basically boils down to this. Kim Jong-un is rewarding his citizens, maybe boosting morale, and also pushing this idea of self-reliance and, providing leisure. It's a way to perhaps buy some legitimacy, maybe at a lower political cost than other options. It kind of frames it as not being primarily about chasing foreign money.
Yeah, that's the core argument. It sounds pretty coherent at first glance. And there is evidence that seems to support this view, especially when you look at the current tourism situation. Foreign arrivals. Still just a trickle. That first post-pandemic Russian charter flight was only in February 2024. It brought maybe 1,500 visitors total that year. And then monthly arrivals apparently dropped below 300 in early 2025.
Wow, the tiny numbers for such a huge place.
Tiny. And China. Their group tours across the border are still suspended. There were some reports of sporadic day passes into the Rayson area in mid-2025, but nothing major. So yeah, the actual foreign tourist numbers are nowhere near what would be needed to fill Wonsan Kalma.
Right.
And on the flip side, you have seen domestic tourism grow, even with sanctions. This whole marketization thing since the 2000s has created this Donju merchant class, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you've got professionals in Pyongyang earning stipends. These are the people who apparently already go to places like the Masakryong Ski Resort or the Munsu Water Park in Pyongyang.
Ah, okay. So there is an existing domestic market for leisure, albeit maybe a niche one.
Exactly. So Wonsan Kalma could just be seen as, well, scaling up that model, extending that template.
It certainly seems plausible on the surface then. Given the trickle of foreigners and this evidence of a growing, maybe internal elite leisure market, you can see why the domestic focus argument holds some water. It paints a clear picture.
It does paint a picture, but okay, here's where we need to maybe push back a bit, or at least add some layers. Before we just accept that conclusion, there are some pretty significant caveats, aren't there? Things that initial framing might overlook.
Absolutely. And this really brings up the crucial question. Who actually benefits from a project this massive? And what are the, let's say, deeper motivations, maybe the ones not stated so openly? Let's talk about affordability and inequality first, because that's a big one. Sure, state media shows happy families enjoying these places,
Yeah.
but we've seen leaked price lists from Masikryong, the ski resort, and a 2-night stay there. It can cost something like US $250 to $300.
Okay, wait. $250 to $300 US? How does that compare?
Well, get this. That's potentially 5 to 6 years worth of wages for an average worker around the provinces.
5 to 6 years for a weekend trip. Wow, okay, that completely changes the perspective.
It really does.
Yeah.
So if Wonsan Kalma is priced similarly, and it likely will be for any premium experience, those gleaming new hotels aren't going to be for the average North Korean family. They'll be for party officials, maybe some rewarded model workers, and definitely the donjuor, that moneyed class.
So that whole idea of it buying broad legitimacy across the population, that starts to look a bit shaky, doesn't it? If only a tiny fraction can actually afford to go, it might even create resentment, not legitimacy.
Precisely. The legitimation dividend, as the economist might put it, suddenly looks very narrow. It's limited to the existing elite and the newly wealthy. And this brings us straight back to the money question. That need for foreign cash, it hasn't just disappeared.
No, definitely not. Pyongyang still desperately needs hard currency, right? For fuel, for imports, probably for luxury goods for that same elite.
Exactly. That need is chronic.
So how does this massive resort, 20,000 beds, multiple duty-free shops planned, how does that square with just being for a limited domestic audience? It still feels oversized, doesn't it?
It does look oversized if the only plan is domestic tourism, especially elite domestic tourism. And interestingly, some North Korean economists interviewed by researchers at 38 North have actually described Wonsan differently. They called it a dual-use project.
Dual use, meaning?
Meaning, yes, it's prestigious for locals, a showcase, but it's also strategically built and positioned so it can pivot fast if the situation changes. Like if Chinese group tours suddenly got the green light again, or if sanctions were eased somehow.
Ah, okay. So it's built with potential future foreign income in mind, even if that's not happening right now. It's about keeping options open.
Exactly. It's about strategic flexibility, maintaining the infrastructure, keeping it ready so they can potentially switch on that hard currency tap if the political climate allows. It's a longer game.
Okay, that makes more sense as a strategy,
Yeah.
but there's still the issue of track record, isn't there? The Economist piece didn't really touch on this, but North Korea has a history of these huge, grand projects that don't always end well.
That's a really critical point.
I mean, you think of the Ryugyong Hotel, that infamous pyramid structure in Pyongyang, sat unfinished for decades. Or even smaller things, like the Miram Horse Riding Club. These places often look great at the opening ceremony, but then
They languish. Maintenance is incredibly resource intensive, especially in North Korea's economy. Upkeep drains scarce funds. And you mentioned seeing photos from Wonsan Kalma just days after opening, showing patchy landscaping, unfinished bits.
yeah, exactly. It hints at the potential struggle to keep something this vast, fully operational and pristine long-term.
History really does suggest Wonsan risks becoming another one of those projects. You know, impressive initially, serves its propaganda purpose, but then struggles once the spotlight moves on and the hard grind of maintenance begins. It could become a white elephant.
So the sustainability is a huge question mark hanging over it. And beyond the pure economics or domestic politics, there are other angles here too, right? Things that often get overlooked in the usual reporting.
Oh, absolutely. And this is where it gets even more layered. You start seeing how this project might serve multiple, maybe even hidden, agendas.
Like what?
Well, consider the military angle. The Kalma Peninsula, where the resort is built. That's not just any piece of coastline. As recently as 2017, they were firing Musudan intermediate-range ballistic missiles from there.
Really?
From the resort location.
From that area, yes. So, turning a missile launch site into a tourist resort, that sends a message. It allows the regime to push this swords into plowshares or maybe guns to water slides narrative.
Ah, I see. It's a PR move. Especially with sanctions ongoing, they can try to project this image of peaceful development.
Precisely. It fits with their diplomatic outreach, particularly towards the global south.
Mm-hmm.
Look, they can say we're focusing on development and tourism, not just missiles.
That's quite a spin. Okay, what else?
Then there's the climate and disaster risk, which you touched on earlier.
Right, the typhoons. Wonsan is right on that vulnerable east coast. Typhoon Maysak in 2020 caused huge damage in that region.
Exactly. So you build these vast concrete structures, promenades, hotels, right on the coast.
Huh.
They could be highly vulnerable to storm surges and high winds in the future. And what happens then?
It becomes a massive drain on resources just to rebuild and repair, doesn't it? Takes away from other needs.
Potentially, yes. It could become a recurring sinkhole for the country's already very stretched reconstruction funds. It's a gamble against nature, in a way.
And one more angle you mentioned, the Russian connection.
Yeah, the Russian sanctions busting angle. It's speculative, of course, but worth considering. These new efforts to promote joint North Korean-Russian tourism. They're small scale now, but could they be used for other purposes?
What kind of purposes?
Well, could tourism be used as a cover for other activities? Maybe moving sanctioned goods, facilitating financial transactions, perhaps even masking movements of personnel, like workers going to Russia, or maybe even related to arms deals. It's hard to monitor. It creates real headaches for the UN panel of experts trying to enforce sanctions.
So what looks like tourists on holiday could potentially be masking something else entirely. Adds a whole geopolitical layer to it.
It certainly complicates the picture. It's another potential dual-use aspect, if you like.
Okay, so pulling all these threads together, once on Kalma, it's clearly not just a simple beach resort. What's the final takeaway here? How should we really be thinking about this?
Well, I think calling it North Korea's Benidorm is probably missing the mark by quite a bit. It's much more like a stage set designed to play several roles all at the same time. Yes, it's partly an elite reward system. Yes, it's absolutely a propaganda showcase for both domestic and international audiences, but it's also, crucially, being kept ready as a potential hard currency earner, a latent funnel for foreign cash.
So that domestic tourism idea, while part of the story, is really incomplete on its own.
I'd say so, yeah. It's plausible, but limited. The affordability issue drastically restricts its reach among ordinary North Koreans. And Pyongyang's constant desperate need for dollars means that door for foreign tourists, particularly Chinese or Russian ones, is always going to be kept at least slightly ajar, ready to be thrown open the moment the political winds shift.
It's pragmatic then, multi-layered, not just one single motivation.
Exactly. It reflects the regime's need to juggle multiple priorities. Internal stability, elite satisfaction, international image, and always the bottom line of hard currency.
So ultimately, whether this place actually becomes a thriving resort or another half-empty prestige project, it really depends on things beyond just the construction itself. It comes down to border policies, will they open up more? And maybe more fundamentally, can the regime actually afford to keep the lights on, keep the water sides running year after year, long after the initial photo ops have faded?
That's the multi-million-dollar question, isn't it? Sustainability and political choices. Those will be key.
Definitely something to keep an eye on, and certainly gives you a lot more to think about than just pictures of beaches. We hope this discussion has helped shed some more light on a really complex situation. Thanks for joining us for this look at the Wonsan Kalma Beach Resort.